John, I really admire you because I've been hearing about you over the years. You've done an interview with me, and
Hmm.
um, there's things that I've been discovering about your private life, which has made me really interested in doing this interview with you. You interview
Okay.
people, but I'm not sure that everybody knows your background and what you're all about. So I wanted to start with, where did you start training? Why? And who inspired you? And who inspired them? Are they still alive? Just if we can start with that, where, why, and who.
Okay. I started training when I was about 13 years old, and my inspiration was, I just wanted to be a bodybuilder. I discovered bodybuilding. Actually, my first inspiration was Bruce Lee, the martial arts expert who was a great movie star. And I saw a picture of Bruce Lee. I didn't know who he was, and it was a picture of him from Enter the Dragon, and he was very ripped and very muscular. And I used to read comic books when I was a kid, and I used to like the superhero comic books. And Bruce Lee looked like a real life superhero. I never saw anybody so muscular and ripped before. And I didn't really watch the Green Hornet show when it was on. I used to watch Batman, so I really wasn't aware of who Bruce Lee was. So when I saw this picture, it was right after he died. So there was a lot of books and magazines about him on the marketplace. So I bought everything I could about him. And one of the things he did, in addition to doing martial arts and calisthenics and running, was he also lifted weights. So when my parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas that year, I told them I wanted a weight set so I could look like Bruce Lee. And when I got the weight set, I didn't know what to do with the weights. There was this little, like 12 exercises and a little program that came with the weights. So I started doing that, but I wanted to do more. So then I started looking around and I found the bodybuilding magazines. And when I discovered what bodybuilding was, I said, that's what I want to do. So really, when I was about 14, that's when I made the decision I was going to be a bodybuilder. And I started reading the magazines, and I wanted to be Mr. Universe right off the bat. I said, I want to win Mr. Universe, and I want to be in the magazines like all these guys I was reading about: Arnold, Franco, Zane, Ferrigno, Robbie, Menser, Cal Scalak. In fact, Cal Scalak won the Mr. Universe that year. That was in 1977. And I remember he was 24 years old. And I said, I want to do the same thing because I was 14. So I said, in 10 years, I want to win Mr. Universe like Cal Scalak did. And then I saw Mike Menser, and Mike Menser was in Weeder's magazine, and I think he was the editor in chief, and he was writing articles every month. So I said, wow, look at this guy's, like, he's making a living as a bodybuilder. He's going around the world. I saw pictures of him guest posing in France and Germany. He's giving seminars. He's writing articles for Joe Weider, and he had his own line of heavy duty muscle building courses, the training manuals. So I said, maybe you can make a living doing this. So that's what inspired me, and then that's how I really got into being a bodybuilder. So at 14 years old, I said, this is what I want to do with my life. I was absolutely positive that I wanted to be a bodybuilder.
So John, it was Bruce Lee. It wasn't one of the regular bodybuilders that inspired you to start. You later
Right.
discovered bodybuilding. That's very interesting. Did you ever take up martial arts as well, or did you just stick to bodybuilding?
Yeah. When I discovered who Bruce Lee was, I read books about him and I did everything he did. So I started running, I started doing push-ups, I started doing sit-ups, a lot of calisthenics. I started weight training, and I also took a martial arts class at the local park district. But I really wasn't into it. I had no passion for martial arts. I just wanted to look like Bruce Lee. So I took, I don't know how long I took the class for, maybe 3 months or something. And I remember one time we were in class and the guy was going around with the pad, and we all had to kick the pad one by one. And I remember I kicked it and I just had no passion. It was just like, yeah, it's like half-assed. And he just looked at me with this disgusted look. So it's like I knew that I really wasn't into martial arts. I was more into bodybuilding and building muscles.
Sure. There's a photo of him. I'm not sure if it's the same photo you're talking about, where he's spreading his lap.
Yeah, yeah, and Enter the Return of the Dragon. Yeah,
Yeah. That,
yeah,
and Enter the Dragon, there was another bodybuilder in there, Bolo.
Yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, I was there looking at all of that. In fact, so you first saw all this in 1977.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
I discovered it the year before you in 1976. So
Okay.
yeah, we're right up there doing the same thing. So John,
Right.
once you got past the Bruce Lee phenomenon, and you started training, and you knew pretty much, you fell into bodybuilding, and you quickly probably realized what you should be doing, or what were your loads like? What was your rep range? The tempo of your training? Was it anything different than usual, and what did it evolve into later?
Yeah. Well, when I started, when I was 13 and I got that weight set, I was just going like 3 days a week, very basic. I would do squats, bench presses, barbell rows, overhead press, standing tricep extensions, barbell curls, like one exercise for each body part. But then when about a year later, I started training much more, and I bought the book Pumping Iron. And I think this was before I was buying any magazines. And in the book, they said that Arnold trained 6 days a week, and he trained each muscle group 3 times a week. So he did chest and back in the morning, and then legs at night on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then he did shoulders and arms on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. So I did the same thing. I would get up early in the morning at 5 a.m. before going to school, and I would go into because I trained at home. We had a area in the back of the house called the porch, and that's where I went in and I would train there. So I would do chest and back on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings, and then come home at night and I'd do legs. And then on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I would do shoulders and arms. So I was way over training because I was only 14 and I was training each body part 3 times a week, doing a double split routine. But I actually grew from that because I was a total beginner. I started off weighing 135 pounds at 5'8", and a year later I was 155. So I gained 20 pounds of muscle.
Okay, so you made some good gains out of that. What was your
Yeah.
diet like back then, John?
My diet, I can't really remember. I was just eating really good food. I remember I wasn't eating any sugar at all, eating a lot more protein, like tuna fish. And I think I was having protein drinks, but back then the protein drinks were pretty ancient and they were pretty terrible tasting. Um, Probably eggs. And it really wasn't that sophisticated of a diet. I remember I was just eating good, natural, whole foods. And I was taking a lot of supplements. I remember I was taking liver tablets because that was the rage back then. I was taking 30 liver tablets a day. So I would take 10 for breakfast, 10 for lunch, 10 for dinner. So when I was at school, I remember swallowing 10 liver tablets at the water fountain. And one of the teacher's assistants came up to me. He didn't know what I was doing, because nobody was lifting weights back then. There were no bodybuilders in school. I was the only one. So they didn't really understand me taking supplements and things like that. So, but later on, obviously my diet got better. But I remember just in the beginning, when I was a kid, before I got into bodybuilding, I used to eat a lot of junk food, cookies. I'd eat like Oreo cookies, and I just didn't exercise much. I wasn't fat. I was real skinny. I had a very fast metabolism, but I just wasn't into health at all. And I totally made that switch. Once I started bodybuilding, I dropped all the cookies. I dropped anything with sugar in it. I became a real health fanatic. And everything I put in my body was designed to build muscle. I was reading the magazines, and that's what Arnold preached, and that's what Joe Weider preached. So I was following everything they said.
So, John, when did you get to a stage where you worked out something customized for yourself that you felt worked, and that you may have stuck with over the years? And that's again with what loads, rep range, tempo, anything different about your training than the standard stuff that we always hear about. When you
Yeah.
your own, and you realize, okay, well, this is what I've got to do. This is what I learned from the magazines, but this is what John Hansen has to do now in order to move forward.
Well, about a year later, when I was 15, I was reading Muscle Builder magazine, and Arnold said, some guy asked him about how often you should train. And the guy was saying, I heard you train each muscle group 3 days a week. And Arnold corrected him, and he said, no, I only do that before contest. Normally, I only train 4 days a week and train each muscle group twice a week. So then I was like, oh, man, I've been doing everything wrong. So then I totally changed and went only to 4 days a week. So I would train half my body, like chest, back, and shoulders on Monday, Thursday, and then do legs and arms on Tuesday, Friday. And then I started actually getting even bigger. because I was not overtraining like I was before. So I pretty much stuck with that routine for a while. And then I started competing when I was 16, about a year and a half later. And when I did my first teenage show, I think I only got sixth place. And the guys who were in it were much bigger than me. They looked like men. You know, the 19-year-olds were very, very developed. So I had a long way to go, but it was really inspirational and it really motivated me. So I started competing all the time. Like every 3 or 4 months, I'd go into another teenage show. I think there was about 4 teenage shows a year in Chicago where I lived. So I would go in about every one. And over a 3-year period from 16 to 19 years old, I entered 10 teenage contests. So I was competing a lot as a teenager. And then when I was getting ready for a show, I would train about 6 days a week, training each. Well, I think I was splitting the body up over 3 days. So doing like chest and back, legs, shoulders and arms, chest and back, legs, shoulders and arms. So I trained 6 days in a row pre-contest. And then in between contests, I trained 4 days a week, you know, and train each muscle group twice a week. So again, probably overtraining, but as a kid, I could recuperate better.
So how long before so many shows in such a short period of time, how long before the show would you switch over to contest mode as opposed to training 4 days a week? And were you making much progress while you were doing this if you were in contest mode all the time?
Yeah, I could have got a lot bigger as a teenager. I mean, I gradually did get a little bigger each year. And like as a bodybuilder, I was improving. My proportions were improving. I would bring up weak body parts because that was the good thing about competing so much is every time I would compete, my younger brother would go with me to the shows and he would take pictures and I would study the pictures, especially when we were doing the mandatory poses and they were comparing me to everybody else. And then I could see which body parts needed work and which ones I needed to bring up. And I would try to do that in between contests. But I was competing so often and I had such a fast metabolism, I really wasn't putting on a lot of size, you know, from year to year. If I would have did 1 show a year or even 2 shows a year and then just had a longer off season, I would have made much better progress. But I really wasn't thinking about it long term like that. And I was just so motivated to compete that I ended up competing too much. But as far as like competing, like dieting for shows, when I was a teenager, the longest I would diet would be 3 to 4 weeks because my metabolism was so fast. I had a hard time putting on weight. And if I dieted 4 weeks, I would be ripped, you know. So
you diet, John?
It didn't take long to get ripped, huh?
How would you diet? Was it because I've spoken to a few other people, and it just seems that you know when they're dieting for a contest that's no carbs or zero carbs,
Mm-hmm.
then the rest of the year they're eating clean, but you know it includes carbohydrates and everything. What about yourself? Because you had a fast metabolic rate, surely you didn't go on zero carbohydrates.
Yeah, again, I don't remember exactly what I ate, but I just ate cleaner, probably lower fat, less calories, and I wasn't really into counting up everything like I did later on. I wasn't really as scientific about it as I became later, you know, in the next few years. But when I was a teenager, it was just lower calories for 4 weeks. I'd get ripped. And as long as I followed it without any cheating for 4 weeks, I would always be ripped. So in the teenage shows, some shows I would come in a little bit bigger, but I was too smooth and I wouldn't do as well. Other shows I would get really ripped, but I'd be kind of small, kind of stringy looking. So I really didn't have a great career as a teenager. I never won a teenage show. And overall, I won my class once. I took a few second places, but it was also very, very competitive back then in the 1980s.
Yeah.
We would get typically 30 teenagers in every show. And the Teenage Mr. Illinois, they would get like 80 to 100 competitors, teenagers. I remember one time, 2 years in a row, I did the Teenage Illinois, and there was 40 to 45 guys just in my class.
Right.
So it was amazing, yeah. So it was very, very competitive. So it was really hard to win a teenage show, and I think I needed a longer off season in order to do it, you know.
Sure. So, John, how do you do it now? Because from what I can see, you're still competing in open shows. You're in your 50s. You've won the natural Mr. Universe, the natural Mr. Olympia on, you know, different occasions. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still competing. You're still peaking every year. How have you refined your diet? How do you do it now? How do you train? How do you diet now? how long is your off season? What do you do in the off season? And, how do you zero in for a contest? Do you actually do carb loading? Just if you can explain all that to us, I think everybody would be really interested in hearing that.
Okay. I don't compete all the time. The last time I competed was in 2016, but I do try to like peak. Maybe not every year, but every couple of years, just to see what I look like at that age as I'm getting older. So I just challenge myself, and I'll diet for as long as it takes. In the off season, sometimes I go up in weight. Like last year I got up to 230 or 225, 230, which is really heavy. And at that weight, I'm carrying a pretty significant amount of body fat. So when I get that heavy, it takes me a longer time to come down. It might take me 6 months of dieting to really get ripped because my metabolism obviously much slower now. What I'm trying to do now is I did my last photo shoot in December. So I'm trying to maintain more of a leaner, maybe around 210, 215, and keep my waist only like 2 inches bigger than it was when I did my photo shoot. And I find I look much better. I'm still stronger. I'm still able to eat a lot of calories. So I don't need to go up that heavy. And I don't think it's good to gain that much fat as you get older because your metabolism changes and it gets much, much harder to lose it. So right now I try to stay leaner, but I know exactly what I'm doing now as far as the diet because I count my diet. I write down my diet every day, even in the off season. Even if I'm not getting ready for a contest, I always write everything down. I record everything. I weigh everything that I eat. So I know exactly what I'm eating in the off season. So when I get ready for a contest, it makes it much easier for me to gradually just bring that down and still keep the muscle as I get ripped. As far as my training goes, I always believed in training with the basic movements, the compound movements. I'm still old school. I still train like I did in the 1980s as much as I can. But now, instead of training heavy and hard all the time, what I try to do is I cycle my training. So I'll have a 6-week cycle where I'll go heavier and I call it a power cycle where I try to increase my strength. And then I'll take a week off or I'll do a week of what I call a deload week where I go really, really light, only 50% of the weight I normally use. And then I'll come back and I'll do a mass cycle and I'll do the same routine I did with the power cycle, but I'll use slightly lighter weights where now I'm training with a repetition range that's more for hypertrophy. So that would be anywhere from 6 to 10 reps, where in the power cycle I might be using 3 to 6 reps, heavier weights.
And so your strength at this age compared to, say 30 years ago, is it still up there, or have you just not got the ability to lift the weights that you did? How is that working for you? Are you still capable of handling the same sort of poundages, and you in fact need to do that?
It's not the same, but I'm still training pretty heavy. I'm definitely not as strong as I was in my 20s or even my 30s, but I still try to train as heavy as I can. Some people at my age prefer to go lighter and just do more pumping movements. I'm still following the same type of routine that I did before because that's what worked before. So I figure even if I'm older, it still works. So I still try to push myself as much as I can. I still try to train as heavy as I can. Every power cycle, I try to keep going heavier and increase my strength. It doesn't always work that way because I am getting older, but I try to. And I never really think about my age, when I'm going through my training. I just go to the gym and I train as hard as I can. And some people say, wow, you're training pretty heavy for your age, but I never even think about my age. Or you look pretty good for your age, but that never even comes to mind for me. I'm getting older every year like everybody else, but I don't really think about it. It doesn't really matter to me.
No, I really admire that because I agree with that. You're not using age as an excuse. And the last time you competed, I think it was in an open contest in Florida, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So, John, how have you refined your eating, with carbohydrates in the off season leading up to a contest? Do you carb load? What do you do with your fats, carbohydrates, calories, all that sort of stuff? If you could share that with us.
Protein I keep moderately high, so it's a little bit over a gram per pound of body weight. So I'm eating about 6 meals a day, and I eat obviously a complete form of protein each meal. So egg whites, turkey, steak, salmon, chicken, protein drinks, things like that. The carbohydrates, I try to eat a little bit more complex carbohydrates. My body seems to respond better when I go a little bit lower on fat and a little bit more complex carbohydrates. I've tried it both ways. I remember when I was in my 40s and my metabolism was starting to change, I started to lower my carbs, and that worked for a little bit. But I think what works best for me overall is keeping the carbs a little slightly higher and the fats slightly lower. And as long as the calories are at a certain level and I know that I can get ripped, then it seems to work for me.
Okay, that's very interesting, John. Look, you look fantastic, and
Thank you.
you always have. In fact, you claim you're natural, and it just doesn't look like it. Is that for real? Because you look like you're taking steroids. Now,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. Oh, look, I went through a period where I became very good without him. Okay, so I just, is that for real? Have you ever used anything? Do you even do hormone replacement therapy at this age? Like, tell me about that because you look like you're juiced.
Well, that's good. Uh, well, I did use steroids in the past. When I started, like I said, I was 135 pounds. And then I competed as a teenager for 3 years. I did 10 teenage shows. That was all natural. I never took any drugs. And, it was interesting when I read the magazines when I was young. That's when I first started to learn about steroids because they would talk about it in Joe Weider's magazine. And at first, I didn't understand what they were talking steroids were. And I remember there was an interview with Arnold in 1978, Ahmad Tani. You remember him?
Yeah.
He interviewed Arnold, and he was asking him if he took steroids, and Arnold said yes. He took them for competitions. And he said that the only guys who took steroids were the guys getting ready for the Mr. America, the Mr. Universe, or the Mr. Olympia, the top guys, the guys that were in the magazines. And then he gave some advice to younger bodybuilders. He said, if you're a younger bodybuilder, you shouldn't use steroids to gain your muscle because the effects are only temporary. So you should build your body through training and through eating good and eating a lot of calories, because that way you're building real muscle. And if you're using steroids, it's temporary muscle. So I was 15 years old when I read this, and that really resonated with me, and it really stuck with me. And so I said, well, my goal is to be Mr. Universe. So I knew that someday down the road, I was probably going to have to use steroids. And then when I started competing as a teenager, I never thought teenagers would take steroids because Arnold said that the only guys who took steroids were the Mr. America competitors, the Mr. Universe competitors. So I remember my first teenage show, I was 16, and the guys that placed ahead of me, they were 18, 19, and they were huge. But I never for once thought that they were taking steroids. I just thought, well, they're 3 years older than me, so that's the difference. But then as I started competing more and more, and I started getting older, and I was like 17, 18, I would see guys make so much change in a 6-month period. And I didn't understand it. I'm like, what is going on? I mean, I'm training hard. I'm eating good. How are these guys getting so big so fast? And then I started to realize they're taking steroids, which I couldn't believe. I couldn't believe teenagers were taking steroids. But this was in the 1980s, and the gym I trained at was a very hardcore gym. A lot of guys in the gym were on steroids. Everybody who competed was taking drugs. There were guys in the gym who just wanted to look good who were taking drugs. They were very easy to get. They were legal. You could get them from the guy from the front desk would sell them. Guys were shooting up in the locker room. I seen, guys shooting each other in the locker room. So my training partner at the time was, he was about 5 or 6 years older than me. I think he was in his early 20s, mid 20s. And he would go with me to all the shows. And he was taking steroids, and he never competed. He just took them to look big. So he told me one time, he goes, it's killing me to watch you compete against these guys because you're clean, and these guys you're competing against aren't clean. So he goes, let me get you the drugs. He goes, you don't even have to pay for them. I'll get you a cycle. He goes, I guarantee you'll beat all these guys because you're right up there with them now. You're third or second sometimes, He goes, you'll beat them all once you get on a cycle. So I had to think about it, and it was tempting because I was like, man, I do want to win, and I hated to lose, and it really was like my passion. But I said, no, I'm going to wait. I'm going to do what Arnold said. I'm going to build my body naturally. I'm not going to use them, because it's a temporary thing. And I was like, I think I was 180 pounds in the off season. So I go, what am I going to get to? 190, 200? I mean, it's not worth it. So I told him, I said, I'd rather be Mr. America than teenage Mr. America. So I said, I'm not going to take him. So like I said, when I competed as a teenager, I would either compete being bigger, but then I was not ripped enough. And if I tried to get ripped, I was too skinny. So I could never win. So the last year I was a teenager, when I was 19, I competed in the Teenage Mr. America because he came to Chicago that year. And I ended up taking 5th in my class, which was pretty good. But the guys that beat me they looked like they're from another planet. I mean, I didn't even come close to these guys. They were so far advanced. They were so big. They were so ripped. So I really could see the difference between being natural and taking steroids. So when I turned 20, I said, okay, I need a break. I did 10 teenage shows in 3 years. I'm burned out. I got to get bigger. I got to gain size, because the next step was to go into the open men's competition. And I wasn't big enough. I knew I wasn't nearly big enough. So I think I was 175 for my last teenage show. And because my body was so ready to grow, once I started relaxing, I trained 4 days a week. I was training heavier. I was eating more calories. I wasn't dieting for any shows. Within 6 months, my body weight went up to 205. I gained 30 pounds. And I felt great. It was the first time in my life I was over 200 pounds. So after that, I was like, man, I'm on a roll. I'm gonna get to 230 in no time. And then I hit a sticking point, and I couldn't gain any more weight. My weight was stuck at 205 for like 8 months. I was training 4 days a week. I was doing everything right. I was getting plenty of rest. I was doing all the compound movements. I was training heavy. I wasn't overtraining. I was eating a lot of calories, and I couldn't gain weight because my metabolism was so fast. So then a couple of guys from the gym, friends of mine, they were like, well, John, go on some steroids. You wanted to wait until you were done with the teenage. You're done with the teenage. You're stuck now. Now you can go on a cycle. And I'm like, no. I got to push myself harder. I got to gain this weight. I got to gain it natural, like Arnold said. So for the first time in my life, I started recording everything I ate. And this was before the internet was around. So I had to go to the library, and I had to get a big, I bought a book called The Nutrition Almanac. I don't know if you ever saw that book.
I started.
It was around that. Yeah. So it had the listing, the calories of, what vitamins and protein and everything of every food. So I wrote it all down. I wrote exactly what I was eating every day, and I figured it out. And I figured out how many calories I was eating, how much protein, how much carbs, how much fat. And then I almost doubled it in calories. I just force-fed myself more and more food. And I was eating around 4,500 to 5,000 calories a day as I was like 20, 21 years old. And I went from 205 to 230 in 6 months. So at 230 now, I was natural 230 at 21 years old, from starting out at 14 at 135 pounds. So I gained almost 100 pounds during that time in all natural. So I was happy because I all natural, like I said I was going to do. I didn't use steroids to build my body. I did what Arnold said to do, which was I used the training, I used the nutrition to build my body naturally. So it was real muscle. It was my body. So after that, my goal was to win Mr. Universe. So I was going to start off competing in state level competitions and then go to regional level. Then I was going to go to the national level. So this was in the mid 1980s. This was 1985. So back then, in order to turn pro, you had to go to the nationals, the NPC nationals in America. You had to win your class. They had a lightweight, a middleweight, a light heavy, and a heavy. That was it. And then if you won your class, you were on the American team, and you went over to the Mr. Universe, the IFBB Mr. Universe. So they started the NPC in 1982, and Lee Haney, that's what he did. He won the Nationals. Then he went over to the Mr. Universe. He won the Mr. Universe. The next year, Bob Paris did the same thing. In 84, Mike Christian and Rich Gaspari and John Natashek, they all did the same thing. So in 1985, when I was competing, I said, okay, that's my goal. I'm going to win a state title. Then I'm going to go to the regional level. Then I'm going to go to the junior nationals, then the nationals, and then hopefully get to Mr. Universe. So I gave myself a 5-year time period. I said, I'm 22 now, so by the time I'm 27, I have to achieve my goal. So I knew I was going to have to take steroids at this time. So I said, okay, I'll take them as little as possible. I'm going to do it my way. So I'm going to take them 3 months before contest as I'm dieting in order to keep the muscle, keep my strength up, and keep the muscle mass. Because when I was a teenager, I would either compete real stringy and ripped, but I lost my muscle, or I would compete bigger, but I wasn't as ripped. So I couldn't get both. I couldn't be big and ripped at the same time. And the guys who were beating me, they were. And I knew if I couldn't win a teenage show natural, I wasn't going to win Mr. Illinois or the Nationals being natural. It was impossible. So I took the drugs 12 weeks before the show, and I did it when I was dieting because I would diet about 10 weeks out from the contest. So the stuff I took was very low androgenic, high anabolic. I took like Anavar, Decadurabolin, and Primobolan. And so it was in real low dosages too. So I would do it for that 12 weeks, and then I would get off for the next 9 months until the next year. So I was off 9 months, on for 3 months. So the results of that was my first year when I was 22, I went into the state title, which was the Illinois State Championships. I took third place in the heavyweight at 201 pounds. So I was naturally 230, and then I would lose weight as I was doing the drugs. So I wasn't getting bigger on the drugs, but the drugs were helping hold on to my size, and they really helped my strength. I noticed my strength actually went up when I was dieting, which never happened before when I was a teenager. So after taking third place in the heavyweight class, the next year when I was 23, I went back to the state title, and this time I won. I won the heavyweight. I actually weighed the same. I weighed 201, but I won the heavyweight and I won the overall. And then I went to a regional level show in Wisconsin, and I won the heavyweight there. Then I went to the junior nationals, and I only weighed 200 pounds, so I was a heavyweight at 200 pounds, and I got killed. I think I took somewhere between 11th and 15th. Johnny Morant was in it that year. Dean Caputo won it. And in the light heavyweight, Eddie Robinson won, and he beat Sean Ray. And in the middleweight, a 19-year-old kid won his class in the middleweight. So after that show, I was really doubting whether I had what it took to be a bodybuilder. I didn't know if I had the genetics to be a bodybuilder, because I was like, God, Eddie Robinson's 2 years younger than me. He's 21. Guy looks like a pro already. Sean Ray was 20. He looked like a pro. So I waited another year, and I was going to do the junior nationals again, but instead I decided to do another regional level show. So I went into the Southern States, which was a big regional level show. It was in Miami, Florida, but it was covered by all the magazines. Flex magazine would cover it. Robert Kennedy from Muscle Mag flew all the way from Canada to Miami to cover it. So I figured if I win this, I got a better chance at winning this than going to a national level show right away. So I'm going to try and win a regional level show. Then next year I'll do the junior nationals. So I went in it. I was 24. This time I weighed 208, so I was a little bit bigger. And I took second place in the heavyweights out of 24 guys. So it was pretty good, but it wasn't good enough. I didn't win. So the next year I was going to do the junior nationals because it was in Chicago. Every year they would move it around. And I ended up injuring my knee, so I wasn't able to compete, and I didn't do it at all. So the next year I was 26. So remember I said I had to do this in 5 years, and I'm running out of time. So I hadn't used any drugs in 2 years now. So when I was 26, I went into a local level show. It was called the Chicago Challenge. And this time I weighed 212, so I was getting bigger. But I carved up too much, and I was holding water, so I only took fourth place. So the next weekend was the Junior Nationals, and it was in, Memphis, Tennessee. So this time I didn't carve up. I had 1 week to get in shape, and I lost 7 pounds. I went in at 205, and this was the best I ever looked, John. I was ripped. I was vascular. I was full. It was the best condition I think I've ever been in my entire life. So I went into the heavyweight class, and there was 26 heavyweights, and they would bring us out in groups of 5. And, you know, in these national level shows, sometimes you tend to get overlooked. And I'm only 5'8", and I'm only weighing 205, and I'm competing against heavyweights who are much bigger than me. But I was right in the middle. And so I'm like, they're going to put me, you know, they're not going to miss me this time. And I didn't even make the top 15. So I looked the best I ever looked in my life and didn't even make top 15. So after that, I was like, I was going to retire. I was just going to quit bodybuilding because I was like, I just don't have it. You know, I'm obviously not big enough. My friend told me, he said, John, you can't just do the drugs for 3 months for a show. You got to do them all year. Everybody's doing them all year. These guys you're competing against, they're not just doing them for 12 weeks, cycling on and off all year long. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to take the drugs all the time. I actually felt sort of uncomfortable taking them for that 12 weeks every year. So I didn't want to get used to taking them all the time. So then the last year, when I was 27, I decided to actually go over to the AAU because I figured I could go to the AAU, maybe go to the AAU Mr. America, and then go to the NABBA Universe. Because I looked at what Mike Quinn did. Mike Quinn was competing in the NPC, and he wasn't really doing that well. And then one year in 1984, he went over to the Mr. America contest. And then he went over to the Mr. Universe, and he won his class in the NABBA Universe. That was the year Brian Buchanan won the overall. So I said, that would be good enough for me. If I could just win my class at the Mr. Universe, that was my goal from the beginning. It doesn't have to be the IFBB Universe. I'll go over to NABBA and win the NABBA Universe. So I went into a regional level show, which I had a place in the top 2 in order to qualify for the America. And then from the America, I was going to go to the NABBA Universe. And because I was an NPC guy, I wasn't an AAU guy. You know, I think it was kind of a little political, and I went into this contest, and it was definitely between me and another guy, and he was an AAU guy, so I figured he's going to win, I'll get second, but that's good enough. Then I'll go to the AAU America, and then I'll get judged by the national level judges, but I ended up getting third. So that was a bad idea. So then I was like, fuck, I'm done. I'm quitting. And then a couple guys from the gym talked me into going into an NPC show 2 weeks later. And I think I weighed 208 for that AAU show. And my friends were like, dude, just go down to light heavyweight. Kill yourself with the diet. If you go down to light heavyweight, you're so big, you'll beat everybody. So I did. I lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks. I killed myself with the diet. I went super low carbs, a lot of cardio. Went in at exactly 198. I won the light heavyweight class unanimously.
Wow.
I looked really, really good. My waist was real small. My arms were still real big. My upper body was big, but my legs flattened out because my legs are my weak point. And I won my class unanimously, but then I got beat unanimously by a guy from Chicago who went on and he won the Mr. America 2 weeks later. So he was my height. Now, I had seen this guy compete before, John, because when I won the 1986 Illinois State, my first overall title, I was 23 years old. This kid was 19, and he won the teenage that night. And he was a big teenager. So now here we are, 4 years later, 1990. I'm 27. I'm about the same. I was 201 at that show, now I'm 198. He went from whatever he weighed as a teenager, he was 218. He outweighed me by 20 pounds, and we were the same height. His legs were like Tom Platz's. And after the show, I was thinking, I'm like, what did this guy do? You know, he was like day and night. He didn't just change a little bit. He went from day to night. So I'm like, this guy's either got the most incredible genetics ever, or he's taking a lot more drugs than I am. So at that point, I had to decide, what am I going to do? Am I going to take more drugs to be competitive with these guys, or am I going to get out of it? And I decided I'm out of it. That's it. So I said I'm retired. I was 27. I had been in bodybuilding for 13 years. I think I had done probably around 20 shows, and I never achieved my goal. I never won Mr. Universe. I was never on any magazine covers. So I had a good career, but in a way it was a failure because I never really achieved all my goals. But I didn't want to take the health risk, so I was done, and that was it. The next year, and then this kid, by the way, after he won that America, he never competed again. And then I found out later he had health problems because of all the stuff he was taking. So it was because of, I think, the drugs that he made this unbelievable progress.
What was his name?
Pete Miller.
Never heard of him. But
Never heard of him? Okay, yeah. He won the 1990 Mr. America AAU, yeah. So then after that, I was done. I got a full-time job. I was working downtown, and I was judging a lot of the shows with the MPC. And there was a natural contest, with an MPC natural contest. It was called the MPC Natural Illinois Bodybuilding Championships. And the guy who was the chairman for the MPC was also a big advocate of natural bodybuilding, which was kind of new. Natural bodybuilding, I think, started to get bigger in the late 80s, early 90s. So this was 1991. So he held this show at the Bismarck Hotel in downtown Chicago, and it was at a high school. And it was a really big event. He had all these balloons on stage. He would dress up in a tux. He would invite like all these Chicago celebrities. Beverly Crown, who owned the McCormick Place, they were from a really rich family. She would come to the event. He would have like the people who were the anchor people at the local news stations, the local celebrities, they would come. Everybody would get dressed up. It was a packed house. He would have just men and women's bodybuilding, and he would have over 100 competitors, which was a big show back then. And it was an all-natural show. So I had judged the show before as a judge, and I looked at the entry form, and it said to compete, you had to be 1 year drug-free. So I said, okay, maybe I'll try it. You know, I figured I never felt like I did the drugs that extensively. I only did them 12 weeks before a show. I was natural before I got up to 230 before I ever took anything. And even when I was taking them, I was 10 months of the year, I was completely clean, and I only took them for 3 months. So I said, it should be an easy transition for me. So I did the show, and I was a little bit lighter. I think I was like 194, but that was just because I mistimed the diet. I dieted like eight or 10 weeks like I normally did, and I found out that when you're natural, you got to diet a lot longer because you lose the weight slower. And in order not to lose muscle, you have to diet for a longer period of time. So I went into the show a little bit flat, but I basically looked pretty close to how I looked when I was using the drugs, and I ended up taking second place. So the next year I said, I'm going to come back and I'm going to win this thing, because all I got to do is diet a little bit better. Just got to tweak my diet a little bit longer, and I'll look 10 times better. So I trained really hard all year for the next year. And as I was training, I read a natural magazine, and they said there was a contest called the Natural Mr. Universe. And I said, no shit, that's the title I always wanted to win, was Mr. Universe. So I called up the promoter, and it was a different organization. It wasn't the MPC. And I said, what do I have to do to enter your show? I want to go into the Natural Universe. So he said, you have to win one of our shows. You have to win the overall at a regional level show, and then you can enter the Mr. Universe. So it was right after the Natural Illinois, so it was perfect timing. I went back to the Natural Illinois. This time I won. I won the light heavyweight class. I was only a couple pounds heavier, but I looked way better. I was fuller. I was harder, much better shape. Then 4 weeks later, I went to San Francisco, and I competed in the Natural North America, and that was this other organization. And I was a little bit bigger. I was like, I think 3 pounds fuller and bigger and more vascular. And I won the overall, easy. I won the medium class. I won the overall. I won most muscular.
Wow.
And I blew everybody away. So then the Universe was 3 weeks later, and that was in Venice, California, at Venice Beach High School. And a couple of guys told me, they said, if you want to win the Universe, you look good, but you got to come in a little tighter. You're not ripped enough. So I really dieted hard those next 3 weeks. I went to the Natural Universe, and it was much tougher competition. My class, there was like 4 or 5 really good guys. I went out there by myself. I didn't know anybody. New judges, new competitors, everything. Nobody knew who I was. And they judge a little differently there. They don't, when they do the mandatories, they don't call like the top 5 to the front. They called like 6th through 10th to the front. That was the first call out. And then they called 1st through 5th. So I didn't get the first call out, so I go, fine, I'm not even going to make top 5. So then I come back, and then after the prejudging was over, the expediter stopped me, and he said, hey, they want you to stick around because they're going to judge most muscular. So they want you to be in the other guys. And he goes, no, they just picked you. So I knew that I was going to do well, and I ended up winning the whole thing. I ended up winning the medium class, winning the overall, and winning muscular again. So then after that, I was hooked, and then after I won the universe, which was my goal, I was in a lot of magazines. I called up. I was really good at promoting myself. So after I won that, I knew that it was a smaller organization, and the magazines didn't know about it. So I called up, or I actually wrote letters. Back then, we had to write letters, and I wrote letters to Muscular Development, Ironman Magazine, Muscle Mag, and I was in all those magazines. Muscular Development did like an 8-page article on me. So, and then I made the cover of a magazine. It was called Natural Physique. So I finally achieved my goal, which was winning Mr. Universe and being in the magazines, but it was as a natural bodybuilder. And then after that, after I achieved my goal of winning Mr. Universe, it was more of a personal thing for me to see how far I could push my body. So I wanted to see how big I could get in the off season, and then I wanted to try and compete bigger and bigger and bigger. And my goal was to compete bigger than I was when I was using the drugs. You know, I wanted to compete at a heavier weight. So 4 years later, in 1996, I competed in the Natural Universe. I remember in the off season, I was up to 243.
Wow.
And I was eating, again, like 4,500 calories. I was training very, very heavy. And I went down and I competed in the Natural Universe at 208. So I was about 10 pounds heavier than when I won it in 82, 4 years earlier. I had achieved my goal, and again, of getting bigger, competing bigger. And then 2 years after that, they had the Natural Olympia in Greece, and I won that weighing about 204. So that was, you know, and then I stayed competing until I think I was about 41, and then that was probably the last natural show I did.
You know, that sounds great, John. It sounds like you've had a really great career, and you know, you stuck it out and you did it naturally, which is, you know, I really respect that. Um,
Yeah.
you still look fantastic. And John, I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the state of bodybuilding today? Uh, you know, just across the board, competition-wise, the way people eat, the drugs that they use, the way that they train. Can I get um, you know, your opinion on that and what you actually think, and you know, what direction do you feel we're going to go in, or just your opinion?
Well, I think I'm like you, John. I'm an old school bodybuilder, and you know, I grew up when I started. It was the late '70s, so I really like those physiques. You know, Arnold, Pumping Iron, and all those guys in the movie. I mean, I really thought those were really the greatest physiques. And then in the 1980s, I thought that was another great decade where you had Lee Haney and Barry DeMay and Rich Gaspari, Lee Labrada, yourself. Those were really great classic physiques, and I think the reason those physiques were so good, and I think the reason that the sport was so popular then, was because the physiques looked attainable. Obviously, all steroids, just like, you know, they were using them in the 70s, 60s, 80s, but they weren't overusing them, and they still had really good physiques as far as symmetry, smaller waist. The posing was really good. They were really ripped, and they looked like superheroes. I remember the 1988 Mr. Olympia, which is one of my favorite. Mr. Olympia is the one that was held in Los Angeles. I watched that tape all the time, and every guy looked so great. They really look like superheroes. They're all good-looking guys, big, but human. They still look like human beings.
Yeah.
And I think what happened was, you know, the drugs just got too expensive, bringing in growth hormone, synthetic growth hormone, and then they brought in insulin, and these guys got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the judges started rewarding it. And then the bodybuilders just lost their proportions. Their waist started getting too big. They weren't posing as well. Even though they were ripped, to me, they just lost the aesthetic appeal. And I remember guys, Frank Zane, Lee Labrada, Bob Paris. I remember reading interviews with all these guys. Even Arnold. I remember reading an interview with Arnold, and Arnold said that his best competition weight was between 235 to 240. And he's above that, then he's going to lose his proportion, his symmetry. Symmetry would be ruined. So all those guys back then in the 70s and 80s always had an idea of you have to train for symmetry and proportion and muscle mass, not just size at all costs. And I think that's the difference between the bodybuilders from then and the bodybuilders now. I remember Lee Labrada used to say, your body can only hold so much muscle mass. And after you exceed that amount of muscle mass, then your body just loses the proportions and the symmetry, and it doesn't look as good. So that's what changed in the sport. And I think the guys now, they look like cartoon characters. They look like guys in comic books. They don't even look real. And I think a lot of it, obviously it's because of the drug usage. So I'm not a huge fan of the bodybuilders today. I still prefer the golden era, the guys from the 70s and 80s. And that's why I do this podcast about the bodybuilding legends. I talk about the bodybuilders, and I talk to the bodybuilders from the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. I don't want to talk about the guys who are competing now or competed 10 years ago, because I think it was, size at all costs. And I think the judges, they're kind of at fault too, because they rewarded that. This is what they rewarded. And that's why Ronnie Coleman, who started off in his first Olympia, I think the first Olympia weighed 7. And then by the end of his career, he was over 300 pounds. And they just asked Ronnie recently at the Arnold Classic a couple weeks ago, they asked him, if you could take all the guys all the Mr. Olympia, Ronnie Coleman, all his Mr. Olympia wins, and put them all up on stage, which one is the best one? And he said without hesitation, his first one, when he weighed 247. So even Ronnie, the mass monster, agreed that at his lightest weight, that was the best weight. That was the best physique he had.
So John, with your podcast, why you interview, and it's fantastic. I've got the bodybuilding site called classicbodybuilding.com. It's a Facebook group. Eventually, we're going to have a website. And what I'm trying to do there is not only preserve the good part of the sport, which was obviously the golden era, but I want the current guys to join in and see. I want to be able to do something to change the direction back to something like we had. So I try to mix the old with the new. In your opinion, what could we possibly do to fix this? Because we've gone in the wrong direction, maybe even just a little bit, but it's enough. And I just wanted your opinion because I don't know if the classic bodybuilding divisions are actually what we expected. Are they or are they not? Are we going in the right direction with that? What can we do to fix this?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is what you said. I think they're trying to bring in this classic physique or classic bodybuilding, and I think that's going to be the answer. But I think, what Arnold said 5 years ago at the Arnold Classic, where he criticized the bodybuilders and how they looked and how they don't have the V shape and their stomachs are sticking out and they don't know how to pose. I think we are starting to see a little bit of a change. We saw Sean Roden win last year over Phil Heath, and Phil Heath was winning every year, even though he had his stomach sticking out the last couple of years. And finally, the judges said enough is enough. Sean Roden's got a better physique. He's got those great abs, and they rewarded him for it. So that, I think, was a step in the right direction. And then you just saw Brandon Curry winning, and he's also got another great physique with the smaller waist.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll see what happens this year at the Olympia, because at the Olympia you're going to have bigger guys like Rami. Rolly Winkler's going to be in it again. So we'll see. Will Sean Roden be able to repeat, or will they pick another winner who has a smaller waist, or will it just mass at all costs? And then also with the posing, Arnold started bringing out a best poser award at the Arnold Classic, which he had before, but he's always talking about that. So I think the posing still has a way to go. I mean, these guys don't pose like Lee Labrada used to pose or Bob Parrish used to pose. It's not even close. So they got a ways to go with that. But I don't know. It was interesting because I just did a podcast, which is going to be on next week, and I talked to Lonnie Teeper and Peter McGuff, and that was my question to them. I said, what's the shape of bodybuilding? Where's it going now? Are we going to go back to more symmetry? And, Lonnie and even Peter both said, once you have that bigger physique, it's hard to go backwards. We can't go to is a guy like Samir Bannout who weighed 194 pounds when he won the 1983 Mr. Olympia. Could a guy like that, as perfect as he looked that night, if he came out tonight, would he still be rewarded, Mr. Olympia? I mean, is a guy 194 going to be able to stand next to a guy who's 250, who's the same height? I doubt it. I mean, I think the standards have changed, and I don't know if we could go backwards, to like the Frank Zane era, or rewarding someone like Muhammad Makaway or Danny Padilla or Samir Bannout. I just don't know. They should, but it's all up to the judges. In order to be a good judge, I think you have to judge not only size, but also symmetry, proportion, definition, and posing ability. And that takes a good judge, because to be able to look at a physique and to be able to pick somebody apart and really analyze a physique, not just look at the hardness, not just look at the size, that's easy. I mean, I could take someone off the street and put them in a judge's seat and say, okay, here's what hardness is. Here's someone who's hard. Here's someone who's not hard. Go judge the contest. And they could do it. It doesn't take an expert to judge hardness. He's got ripped glutes, so he's first. But when you start taking apart a physique and saying, okay, he's got the symmetry, his physique flows, he's got better proportions. You're looking at the body from head to toe, from side to side, and saying who's got the best proportions. And then they display it, in a posing routine. That's a good judge. That takes really good judging. And you got to be pretty brave to go against modern convention and to really pick apart a physique and say, this is why I'm picking this guy first. But if you look at the 1983 Mr. Olympia, you had Samir first at 194 pounds. Then you had Muhammad Makaway, who was probably 160. He was in second. Frank Zane was in third. No, I'm sorry, Lee Haney was in third.
Yeah.
So Lee Haney was a bigger guy, but he had great proportions. Frank Zane, that was his last Olympia. He was in fourth. And then Bertil Fox, who was a mass monster, but who was lacking in certain things, like he didn't have a good back. He didn't pose as well. His legs were kind of straight up and down. He got fifth. So I remember when I was looking at that at Flex Magazine, a guy from the gym looked at it and he goes, how could Bertil Fox not win? And I'm like, because the judges are rewarding other things. They're looking at symmetry. They're looking at proportion. So those judges, they knew how to judge a physique. They knew what qualities were important in an overall physique. But I don't know if that can happen anymore. I really don't. I think right now the easiest thing for them is say, we're going to judge the open bodybuilding as the mass monsters, and then we'll just make a whole new division for the classic physique. So I don't know, maybe the future of the sport lies in the classic physique, because those guys are limited by their height-weight ratio, so they can't get as big as they want to get. And right now they're still covering the glutes, so they're not judging ripped glutes. So like you said, we haven't really seen that division really come out yet. It's been around for a couple of years, but they're not taking the world by storm yet. We don't have any great physique stars yet in the classic physique division. We're not having any great rivalries like we used to have in open bodybuilding. So I don't know if it's going to happen or not.
John, I trained some, won the classic, and he also won bodybuilding to prove a point that a physique, if it looks good, it can still win. So what Lonnie Teeper and Peter McGough said we can't do, we should be doing. And it's probably going to take somebody to just start a new federation where that's the look. And, not have guys in funny shorts, height to weight ratios, just have good looking bodies. And it's, I can see that in the future. It's going to happen. Somebody will do it. But right now we've got to deal with what we've got. John, I wanted to ask you before we wrap up if there was anybody you wanted to thank, your family, any coach, sponsors, anything that's coming up next for you, if you wanted to cover that, because it's it's been a really interesting interview, and as much as what I would like to do something more in the future and get your opinion on certain things, because you sound you're like a real expert. You're interviewing everybody, but nobody knows anything about you. So,
right.
Yeah, look, I've seen some family photos. Your mother and father look really good for their age, so I can see where you got your good genetics from. Your background. You told me that you moved from Chicago to the state of Florida. I'm not sure if you've ever had any coaches over the years or anybody you wanted to thank. Your sponsors, just that sort of stuff, if you'd like to wrap it up with that.
Okay. Yeah. I was really blessed with a really, really great family, John. And my parents are still healthy. They're still alive, thank God. And next year they'll celebrate their 60th wedding anniversary. I think my dad's going to be 82 this year. My mom is like 78. So I'm really blessed with really, really great, and they're both great people. You know, and it's not only that they're still together and they're still in love, but they're really, really great people. And they always supported me with the bodybuilding. I think they thought it was a little weird, as everybody did back then when I started it. But they were always at every show, and they just always had the attitude, not only with myself but my brother and my sister, that you guys can do whatever you want in your life as long as you're happy. And so they never pushed me to go into anything else. So, and then I have my brother. I got to give him a special shout out because he was always there for me when I was younger. You know, when I started bodybuilding, when I was training at home, he was an artist. He studied arts. He went to art school, and so that's what he got his degree in. He was technical or commercial art. So it was interesting because he wasn't a bodybuilder, but he could look at a physique and he could see which guys look good and which guys didn't from an aesthetic viewpoint. You know what I mean? So when I was trying to develop my posing routines for my teenage contest, he would look at me and he'd go, no, twist your waist a little this way, or put your arm a little higher, you know. And then he would go to the shows with me. You know, all my friends from the gym would go with me, and we'd go to all those teenage shows I did, and we'd be in the car and we'd be driving home afterwards, and he'd be like, he'd analyze every guy. And my friends would look at him like, wow, this guy really knows what he's talking about. But he was a great brother because he went to all the shows with me. He took pictures. You know, he had his camera, and then we would take it to the 1 hour Photoshop after the contest, and we'd get him developed. And he'd put the dye on me. Remember, John, when we had to actually put the dye on, we didn't have the spray tan. He would do that for like 2 days in a row. You know, he was just a great, great brother. So supportive. Everything I did, you know. And then when I won these titles and I tried to do seminars, he would make up the flyers for me, and you know, he would do all that stuff. T-shirts, he would design the T-shirts. When I was promoting shows, he would make up the poster. He was just a great brother, and he still is. But he really, really helped me out a lot when I was younger. And then as far as coaches, I never really had any coaches. I had a lot of training partners who were there for me. But you know how it was back in the day. We didn't have contest prep coaches. We did everything ourselves. So, and then my sponsors now, I have Florida Alternative Medicine, and I have Old School Labs. So they're helping me out with the website and everything, and the podcast, you know, which is on iTunes. So if anybody wants to listen to the Bodybuilding Legends podcast, it's on every Monday on iTunes. So if you subscribe to it, you'll get it automatically. Or you can go to the bodybuildinglegendshow.com, where I have all my video interviews and my podcast. So that's available for anybody.
Okay, well, that's great, John. I'm really happy that I was, myself personally, I always had these questions in mind. So
Yeah.
you answered them really eloquently, and I, even called you out on the steroid thing, which you were really honest about, and I got to tell you, I believe you.
Yeah.
You know, it's been great talking to you, and John, I'd like to refer back to you for any future issues that I come.
Okay.
There's, I think you're an expert in the field, and every once in a while it would be good to see you comment on classicbodybuilding.com. This is definitely going to be on classicbodybuilding.com or wherever we can show it. So,
Okay.
John, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure they're going to find this interview very, very interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you, John. And you were a great champion back in the day. I always admired your physique, as I told you when we did our interview. So best of luck with this show, and I'd be happy to come back on again. It'd be great.
That's fantastic, John. Thank you so much.